Welcome to another episode of the Billy Ho Show, and I'm in a shed full of traction engines, and that's going to be the topic of this particular show. And traction engines were popular in the bottom of the South, Christchurch, with all the flat land. Not too many in the North Island, but the South Island certainly thrived on them. They did all sorts of jobs, from towing 3 or 4 trailers full of grain. They towed the machines that made the grain in the paddocks, and they were a very powerful machine, steam driven of course. And Mr. Burrell, who's some of the machines in here, and there's a photograph of Mr. Burrell on the wall. And now back in the 1870s, when all these things basically started out, I think they may have invented the steam engine that goes on the locomotives by then, but not the traction engine. These started about 1870 something, and by the time they come through to 1900, they pretty much had a handle on how it all went together and how they worked. And I think they were still making them in the 1920s. So these came out to New Zealand, and they were, they just did New Zealand work. 10 horsepower, 11 horsepower, 15 horsepower. But if you put one of these things on a tractor pull machine, it just drags it along and keeps on dragging at 10 horsepower. They're just so powerful. Back in the day, about 1914, the general consensus was that steam was going to be the way forward. And you've just got to imagine that if steam had evolved and evolved and evolved, vehicles would probably be running on a cup of water these days. But no, Mr. Ford and his Tin Lizzie turned up, crank it up, and away it goes. So to get a steam car going, it takes maybe half an hour to get it all fired up and what have you, and they were quite expensive, Stanley Steamers, cars like that. But the little Tin Lizzie, crank, away it goes, and you're off. So that was the way forward, everybody decided, and that's what's happened. Everything runs on petrol or diesel all the way through to current day. I'm told that one of the modern companies in the 70s had a go at doing the steam thing again, but didn't actually happen. So let's have a look at some of these traction engines. This little traction engine was given to a boy called Sam when he was 3, and he just loved it. And Sam today loves the traction engines and the steam and all the components that make them go, but this was his at 3. And I was told that they're all about 9 or 10, and they had this fired up, and they're towing their surfboards and whatnot around the paddock, sort of on behind it, and having a lot of fun. I was just imagine if a boy these days got one of these, he wouldn't know where to start, would he? No, where's the little buttons to, where do I fit my cell phone? But anyway, getting one of these at 3, I think that's absolutely outstanding. And Sam's father, John, got this when he was 9. So his grandfather said, well, I'm going to give you a present. Here it is. And so this was John's from age 9. When you got traction engines in the family, you keep traction engines in the family. These are enormous machines, and this is before the time of welding, so everything's all rivets and nuts and bolts. Enormous wheels, and these wheels would have been steel, just steel wheels when they came, so the rubber on the top they would have had to have got from somewhere else. And it's just interesting that this here come off a scraper, a modern day scraper. So they've got the tyre, they've trimmed it all up, and they've put it on, and Sam was saying it's no easy task. And they've got all these bolts here to just hold the tyre onto the steel wheel. But when they came originally, they would have just been steel. But it's all the tubes that are inside here that keep the heat going, to keep the water hot, to make the steam, to make it go, to all the processes. It's just amazing. And in here, they've got a winch rope. It's about probably an inch thick, and it goes out through the back, and they can winch stuff as well. In Nightcaps, there's a old couple there that we met probably 10 years ago now, that they ran a sawmill. They had a big belt on this flywheel here, and it ran a sawmill, and they chopped up some wood for us, and what have you. But just saying, the old traction engine, she's a beast of a thing. This is the barrel machine, and if I open up this front door, then we've got some tubes in here. You can just make out the other end. Down the other end of that tube is the where everybody sits and fills the firebox up with wood or coal, and they get the fire going. So all those tubes are basically fire tubes, and the water surrounds it. So they're all part of heating up the boiler. But if you ever wondered what was behind the little round door in the front, she's all the heat required to boil the water. And that's why I suppose they call it a boiler. This is a bit like climbing into a Mack truck. If you start off on the wrong foot, you sort of got nowhere to go when you get to the top. But sitting up here with all that machinery in front of me, and the steering wheel, which is a chain-driven thing, so it sort of goes along. But yeah, there's valves and there's a pressure gauge there. Nice bit of a seat to sit in, and there's coal in here behind me. Down there is the firebox. And this was at the Wanaka Wheels at Wanaka show, and it was part of the parade that they were when these things came out and showed off. And I think this one was actually towing a great big 6-wheel drive truck, an Oshkosh. But anyway, when these things go, they're very, very quiet, and they're very, very smooth, and everything's just so you need lots of oil, lots of grease. You see underneath it is just splattered with oil. But I have no idea how to even start one of these things, I suppose, or steam them up. So the guys that have these are passionate about them, and as you saw in the beginning, getting one for your 3rd birthday, getting one for your 9th birthday, means you're pretty much committed to traction engines for your whole life. And they are. And the people who drive these things, as I said, they're absolutely passionate about them and love showing them off. And a couple of the events we've been to, they've all sort of lined themselves up. Then they have a horn blowing competition. So there's a little chain here that attaches to the horn, a little brass horn up the front there. Beep, beep, beep. And for the size of them, they've got a sort of pretty squeaky sort of a horn, some of them. And some of them are big boomers as well. But yeah, a lot of fun. And as I said, they're a great big monster of a thing. Anyway, I just got to tell you about these tyres. Let's slip out and talk about tyres. I'm in a little paddock here, and this is way out the back of where the traction engines are, but this is a collection of scraper tyres. And what they do is they chop it all off, all that centre disappears, and then they've got to put it all onto the steel wheel of the traction engine, and then they sort of drill holes through all this and put bolts through to bolt it onto the big wheel. But he was saying that's no mean feat to sort of try and jam this onto the big steel wheel. But so if you own a traction engine, you've got to have access to all sorts of things, and including some of these great big scraper tyres.
Our traction engine, we come from Rangura, the 10 horse barrel. We've just had that for 2 years in England. We attended a number of rallies over there and ended up a lot of beer tents and had a really good time.
It's in beautiful condition, like these are in really good condition.
And then we've got the Calder family, well-known traction engine people from Canterbury. Stu and Archie up there with a 5 horse McLaren once again. These guys have had traction engines for probably over 150 years. And contracted still are, not with Steve anymore, but very well known.
Now obviously you cannot drive these alone, you have to have a friend.
They like you to have two. Officially we actually can, but they're better with two just for safety these days, and you know what it's like, and the stuff we have to do. It's a world of high vis jackets, isn't it?
It is.
This is the Mackay family from Mathman with the Roby. We had this in England 2 years ago as well, and we got into quite a lot of fun and trouble. Another Calder machine, Class 7 McLaren, as they know it. They just put their canopy on, Ben Calder driving it, and Becky steering. Another smart piece of kit. We did a road run 3 days ago to the Cadrona pub for lunch. The food was slow, but the beer was fast. We had a really good day. Another Calder one here. This is Anthony and Jack Calder, also from Melbourne, in Burrell. Another sort of branch of the family. They all sings in the Burrell.
So we bus.
We have a really interesting one now. We have the Clark family from Edendale with a garage steam truck. It's been sort of semi-modernised with pneumatics and so on. Many years ago they used this to cart a Lions rugby team from the airport to a function in Invercargill, where they duly filled them up with oysters and whiskies, and it showed in the result the next day. But it's a real...
It's relatively quiet, that one.
Now, so tell us
rattle and bang like the others.
furthest afield that these has come from, do you know?
They come in all shapes and sizes.
This guy's from Canterbury, I suppose, yeah. Yep.
And their sort of horsepower rating is sort of like 8 up to about 20. But they've certainly got a lot of power when it comes to...
A couple of wee ones coming.
Models coming.
You see pictures of them with 4 or 5 trailers on, logs and hay bales.
These guys would have built these.
Things
Certainly
like
one of them he built himself. We've got another Invercargill engine coming, Cannington, a Marshall, was a road roller with a hood on, the Scandrick family.
South Island.
It doesn't look like they have the best suspension
Looks like
in the
that
world. Would
seat
that be
swings
fair to
around,
say?
because I doubt if you'd have somebody...
It's barely adequate.
They look like they're jiggling around quite
Barely
hard.
adequate, yeah.
Milburn Lime, every time. Milburn Lime, available all over the Southland district and beyond. Top grade lime that's been available year after year. Call them on 03 417 8228. The next time you need lime, think Milburn Lime, every time. On Saturday, November the 6th, we leave for another Bill Hohepa Old Truck Tour of New Zealand. We leave from Auckland and make our way to Wellington, cross over on the ferry to the South Island and continue down all the way to Richardson's Museum in Invercargill. Then we travel up the coast all the way to Wakefield and on to Rockville. All this and looking at old trucks as we go, as well as seeing a fair bit of New Zealand. And people will travel by minibus. So if you have an ex-truck driving dad or granddad or somebody you know, maybe this special trucking holiday treat will be just the ticket. Maybe a Father's Day surprise. If you'd like to find out more, just go to my Facebook page, Bill Hohepa's 2021 Old Truck Tour, and all the details are there. Or just email me at billhohepa@extra.co.nz. This is a 1914 Stanley truck, and the Stanley people made Stanley Steamers. And so this is a steamer. It's got a boiler in the front there. And the other couple of Stanley Steamers we've seen have tight piano wire wrapped around that boiler to stop it from going. But this is the same, except the piano wire's on the other side of this little tank in there. And here we've got a huge array of adjusting valves. So everything's about the Stanley Steamer is all about pressure. Looking at the dashboard in front of me, it's absolutely loaded. There's a lot of little valves on the dashboard of this steamer. It says brake cooler, hexane, whatever that means, a boiler feed pump, water lifter, little valve here that says something, another one little here. That one says blower, fuel air pressure, and little gauges that sort of tell how those pressures are going. This one here is the speedo, and on the floor there's a brake and a clutch, and you would have controlled the speed by the on the steering wheel there. There's a little rods coming from that steering wheel that do this and that. So this would have been a major to try and drive, but I'm sure back in 1914 they would have wouldn't have taken them too long to get to know it. Now in 1914, as I was saying, steam was just getting started, and they thought this was the way that people's cars were going to go. I'll just see this little, we've actually got two levers here, one forward of the other, so I'm not quite sure what that does. This here, this thing in the middle here, that's a pump. You sort of use that to pump up the fuel that heats the boiler. It's just interesting, very interesting. But in 1914, they, as I said, it's the changeover period for steam to head on its way out and the combustion engine to come on in. They say that the fuel economy of these, that they use just as much fuel as a petrol car to make them go, to get anywhere. Interesting. And so not only have you got all those gauges sitting along the dashboard, you've also got another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tweakers, well, taps in behind the engine. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 little valve adjustments or taps to fiddle with. And if I let that bonnet down, there it goes. It says Stanley across the front, and there's access to the top of the boiler to pour in water and what have you, and that goes down, and there we have it. Lovely acetylene lights. I hate to see this actually get a warrant. I wouldn't have liked to have driven this because all those little tweaks have to be just right to make it go. And it's actually a small bus, this one. It's got some seats in behind the driver's station there. But yeah, 1914, amazing. This is a 1916 Buick. And in 1916, things in the motor industry are getting fired up. They've decided that the combustion engine was the way to go, rather than steam or electric. And some of the original cars in the early 1900s were electric. They stopped making them and went to steam. Well, steam and electric are both working together. And it was the popular notion in 1914 that steam was going to be the way forward. But no, Ford invented their Tin Lizzie, and lo and behold, the combustion engine goes on from there. So this is a Buick, and it's a lovely car. But the thing about the Buick is this. Have a look under here. We've got a 6-cylinder engine, and all the rockers and everything else, you can see them all going on the top. It's got an updraft carburetor and some spare oil and all sorts of different things that were built in 1916. And the world just sort of started a war. So when this was built, the world was fighting each other. And then we come into the cabin here, a lovely dashboard, the clutch and brake with an accelerator, just a little pedal on the floor with a brake on the other side of that, and an enormous back seat. You sat in there and you sort of stretch your legs out, and it was lovely. But this is the style of car that was around in 1916. But I just think that engine is amazing. Roger Mann has a great heritage collection in his new big shed about 3k north of Geraldine. It's not open to the public yet, but if you'd like to visit, or you have a group that would like to visit, just call John on 027 246 7466. That's 027 246 7466, and he'll make all the arrangements. Roger has a fantastic collection, and we know that you'll just love it. Milburn Lime, every time. Milburn Lime, available all over the Southland district and beyond. Top grade lime that's been available year after year. Call them on 03 417 8228. The next time you need lime, think Milburn Lime, every time. What I've got here is a copy of Talking Trucks. This is a book I wrote a couple of years ago, and it's the history of New Zealand trucking. And it's all from the programs that I did between 2013 and 2016. I'm going to let this go for $25. So it's a special. So Father's Day is coming up. So if you'd like your copy, there's my phone number, 027 277 0717. Just send me a text or email me, billhoheper@extra.co.nz to get your copy. $25 and the history of New Zealand trucks. This is a British Fordson, and it says Fordson or son of Ford on the front there, but the grille looks something like the similar grille to the V8s that came out of America, but this one was put together in England. And back in the 50s and 60s, you saw a lot of these running about, and they were sort of like the utes of the period. Notable up here is the blue light, and what that meant was you were towing a trailer, and for some reason they went away about mid-60s, the little blue light up there, but it was common for these and other trucks or cars, if you were towing a trailer, you need to have your little blue light on. Looking in the cab, bugger all room again, but I'll try and get in it. But it's not too bad. Get my other foot in here. I get my foot on the clutch. And get two guys in it, no worries at all. Not a great deal of room there. But anyway, that's the time. Nice speedo, amps, and how much fuel you got. And there's an extra gauge here that says about the oil. But this was a little well side. It was just absolutely brilliant in the day. Little short bonnet, and we'll have a look at that engine and just see what made this thing go. But very, very popular trucks back in the 50s and 60s. In fact, I've got a couple of old photographs we'll show you with these guys in it. Somewhere down there, there's a little four-cylinder engine. It's got a generator on the top and an air cleaner and a Lucas electrical system there, but it's pretty small, probably only about 50 horsepower, maybe that. But this belonged to the Rangiora Borough Council, and as I was saying, in the 50s, these were the sort of the popular utes for the time. Amazing. Also in the shed is this 1944 Morris commercial, and I think this is the same old truck that they used in the film Babe, where the Babe was about a pig called Babe, and who thought he was a sheepdog. And he actually did round up the sheep and things like that, and it was a great little story. But these had their place in history, and they look pretty much like an Italian Sora. And I spoke to Stan Williamson about a Sora, and he said it was the most gutless, useless truck he'd ever had anything to do with, and he carted a bulldozer around on the back of it. But anyway, let's have a look in the cab here. So sitting in this cab, there's not a great deal of room from the back of the seat to the dashboard. And if I get in behind the steering wheel, it's going to be pushing into my guts. And down on the floor, they've got two round pedals that are pretty close together. And so my feet are going to be sort of size 12s, are going to be playing around a bit there. But anyway, in 1944, I'm sure the population wasn't as big as I am, and people could just jump in and out of these things, no trouble at all. But it's just great to be able to sit in a bit of English manufacturing a truck, and the old window winder. Most things today, you push a button, the window goes down, but no, they've got the old window winder here, and I think it's probably got a four-cylinder engine under that bonnet, so we'll have a look in a tick. But it's just interesting to get in the cab. Of this old girl. So this is what drives the old Morris commercial, just a four-cylinder engine. It's only probably a 30 hundredweight truck and can carry sort of like 1.5 tons of stuff. But a lot of farmers had these on the farm, and they served them very, very well. This is a Dodge, it says on the front there, And it also came out as a Fargo, and I think they even called them DeSotos. But in England they had Dodge and DeSotos and Fargos as well, except they were made in England and they didn't look anything like this. And I'll just have a look at the other side here. And it says that it's a 1953 Dodge Fargo. And a lot more room in them than what we would have had in like the last truck there was a Morris commercial in 1944, but this has got huge amounts of room in it. And what I like about it also is it's got the butterfly engine bonnet, and in there looks like a Flathead 6, and keeps the whole thing going. But isn't she beautiful? Lovely colour scheme, white wall tyres, hubcaps, beautiful. I'm sitting in the oldest registered car in New Zealand, and this was built in 1898. And it's just amazing how ideas for cars and motorbikes were going on from about 1898 forward, all the way through the teens, 19s, and different ideas are coming up and being explored and put into cars, and like common rail diesel and fuel injection in 1918. So nothing's new, and it's all stemmed from somebody who's thought this up to make a car. It's called a Dion Buton is the name of this car, and it's got brass everything. But it's just interesting that this car is so old, and it's just the way they've made it. It's got wire spoke wheels, a little cabin in there. It's a bit like the electric car built in 1902 that we saw at Wanaka. And there's a little stack of levers in here to drive it. Obviously this is the steering wheel, and not sure what all these other little knobs and things do. There's a horn, a bit like the Model T we saw before, handbrake, and on the side there's a winder, obviously, that you maybe heard of. It's like an aeroplane. Remember the aeroplanes that you've got to wind up until they can't wind anymore, and then you push a button and boom, it flicks the propeller over. Maybe this is the same, or maybe that's just an ordinary crank handle to get it cranked up and get it going. But it's one pedal here, and maybe that's the brake, maybe that's the accelerator. Who knows? Maybe it's a clutch, bit of a storage under there for spare parts, and operator's manual. But on this side there's also a mirror, so you can see who's coming along behind you, but I think you'd probably just be looking at a horse and cart, sort of trying to keep up. But anyway, that's the mirrors there. The engine's in the back, so it's got a bit of a grill, and the engine around the back here is hidden behind there, but she's got a diff, a brass tail light, and 1898, the oldest car, the oldest registered car in New Zealand. So if you've got something older than this, there's my phone number, give me a yell. Love to be able to come and see it. This is a 1957 Citroen DS19 it's called. But I remember when these cars came out as a kid in 1957, 58, they were just way ahead of their time. They just looked like rocket ships. But it's just interesting about the steering wheel. It's just got a bar that comes out, and then there's a circle right around that. So there's no middle part of that steering wheel. It's just a circle held on from the bottom. You might be interested to know this is a French car, but they're actually manufactured in England. I didn't know that, so you learn a new thing every day. But the thing about this, as I said, I remember, is that steering wheel.